Poland was called New Europe by the West during the 1990s. If they had read their history books, they would have corrected that to Old Europe. Poland is celebrating the anniversary of the coronation of its first king, Bolesław I. So, what exactly are we celebrating? Join me, Jan Darasz, for How We Got Here.
Behold the replica of St. Maurice's spear, a gift from Holy Roman Emperor Otto III to the up-and-coming Duke of Poland, Bolesław the Brave, presenting it in the year 1000 as a powerful symbol of divine authority and legitimacy. Otto wanted to strengthen ties with Poland without granting full imperial status. 25 years later, in 1025, Bolesław the Brave would be crowned king, marking a major milestone in achieving international recognition and solidifying centralized rule. The event ushered Poland into the European community of Christian kingdoms and empowered it to pursue the Christianization of pagan Baltic peoples like the Prussians and Lithuanians. Lithuania, the largest remaining pagan population in Europe at the time, converted to Christianity in 1387 as part of its union with Poland. Still, the Teutonic Knights questioned the legitimacy of the conversion and used it as a pretext for war. But Poland and Lithuania taught the order a bitter lesson of humility at the Battle of Grunwald in 1410. As a result, Lithuania's Christianization was recognized and secured, and the regional balance of power remade. The victory led to the formal creation of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in 1569, shifting the regional balance of power. The Renaissance saw Poland shooting for the stars with luminaries such as Nicolaus Copernicus, who was one of the first people in Europe to research heliocentrism and argue for its validity. The Warsaw Confederation of 1573 guaranteed freedom of religion, a remarkable achievement in an era of religious wars elsewhere in Europe. Poland asserted its role as a safe haven for Jews, Protestants and other persecuted minorities. The Commonwealth reached the peak of its power around 1619, with territories stretching from the Baltic to the Black Sea, as a multi-ethnic, multi-religious realm that influenced politics and culture across Central and Eastern Europe. In 1683, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth changed the face of Europe again, this time repelling Ottoman forces in the Battle of Vienna. The 18th century saw the weakening of Polish military on the one hand and the development of education on the other. The crowning point of Poland and Lithuania's state building was the May 3rd Constitution of 1791, the world's second oldest written constitution. Unfortunately, it also turned out to be the Union's swan song.
I'm delighted to welcome our guest today, Dr. Tomasz Borowski, a historian from the Archaeology Department at the Warsaw University and the curator of the exhibition commemorating the 1000th anniversary of the coronation of Bolesław I at the Polish History Museum here in Warsaw. Welcome to the programme.
Hi, thank you for having me.
We've had a whistle-stop tour from 1025 up to 1795 in that clip. We'll go right back to Bolesław I. What was the significance of the coronation, and what were the motives of Bolesław Chrobry, former Duke of the Polish lands, getting crowned king? What's the significance of that title?
Well, the coronation of 1025 was sort of a crowning achievement of Bolesław's life, but also of the process of state building, which in Central Europe, in the frontier of the civilized world at the time, was a very difficult and sort of monumental task. It began with his father, but then it had humble beginnings, and in the course of 30 years of Bolesław I's rule, he endeavored to sort of bring Poland up to the standard of the civilized world, to make it part of the old Roman world, not Western Europe, but generally civilized world of the Roman times.
So, just have to interrupt you there. What was the definition of civilization in those times? Was it the Latin language, the church? What defined civilization?
Very much the church. The Latin language, not necessarily. The sort of in my view, quite often the division between Christianity and ancient world is exaggerated these days. Christianity very much grew out of the ancient world, and the division between civilized and non-civilized, it was inherited from the Greeks, basically. So it was the church, the Christianity, but also the Roman law. Roman law, which from the time of Justinian and Constantine was a Christian law, but it was referred to as the Roman law. Whether Greek or Latin or Syriac in the East, it was just a matter of the civilized post-ancient world. So in 1025, this sort of goal which Bolesław embarked upon when he began his rule was achieved. On a personal level, this gave him international recognition, but, and this, I'm sorry if this is sort of too long of a digression, but in Poland we have two coronations, basically. One is in the year 1000 in the Congress of Gniezno, and the other one is 1025, and they are very different. Ironically, for Poles at the time, the year 1000 seemed more important. The earliest Polish chronicles, Galanonim, Wincenty Kadłubek afterwards, they only refer to the coronation of the year 1000. And even Bolesław himself probably thought that the year 1000 may be more important because he started using the title king already after 1000. He minted coins with the title rex, king. So one might ask, why the second coronation? Why was it important?
So the second coronation, as I understand it, was approved by the Pope. The first coronation was his arch rival Otto III, the Holy Roman Emperor.
Yeah, though he was not really a rival. The Otto III was actually a sort of an ally. But it wasn't a partnership because he was an emperor and Bolesław was a prince. But he was a patron, and an ally of sort of Poland, of the Polish state. He chose Poland and Bolesław as an agent of his general vision of sort of expanding this civilized world into Sclavinia, into the land of the Slavs. Although, of course, not as a partner, because he, as an emperor, had no partners on this earth. He was the head of Europe, of civilized world, but as a partner. Then the problem was that Otto III died soon afterwards in 1002. So the next emperor, his vision was sort of much more direct. Because Emperor Otto III never sought to control Poland directly. He was happy with this sort of hierarchy of him being at the top and local princes being below. But,
junior partners.
Yeah, junior partners, but without any direct control. However, the later emperors tried to change that. They want to have a more direct control, and the status of Poland as a kingdom would make it more difficult. They wanted to play different Slavic princes against each other for favor. Czech, Rus, Poland, whomever would grow too powerful, they would sort of downgrade him and play them against each other. So that's why after the death of Otto III, wars between Poland and the Holy Roman Empire start. However, the reason why Polish sources don't mention 1025 is because from the Polish perspective, Bolesław was king already from the year 1000. Because this marked the moment when the old Slav tradition kind of died. Slavs never had kings before. Slavs which much more poorly organized, or we can favorably say democratic. They have a sort of gathering of the elders. They had no kings. From the year 1000, Bolesław I, he sort of established a semi-authoritarian rule. He enforces his will on his people, and that's why they treat him as king from that period. 1025, that's a moment when the Pope and the Western world starts treating him as king as well. So year 1000, that's internal. On the internal sphere, he becomes king. 1025, that's when the external world accepts him as a king.
I mean, his gaze at that time is west, but not just for the West and the Holy Roman Empire. He expands Polish territory into the lands of Kievan Rus.
Oh, yeah, very much.
So the same strategic dilemmas faced Bolesław Chrobry as they do today, east and west, is that axis?
Yes, indeed, although at the time, that's before the division between Orthodoxy and Catholicism. At the time of Bolesław's reign, there is still no division. It's the same church. There are some arguments, but it's before the schism. So he expands Poland. He wants to make Poland the sort of chief state of Sclavinia, of the Slavic world. And for this, he makes enemies. He counters rulers of Czechia, of Bohemia, and of Rus. He tries to be the principal Slavic ruler. So in this sense, yes, and he wants to expand into East. However, the perspective, his perspective is still a little bit different, because the moment, I apologize, Bolesław Chrobry never wanted to conquer Kiev as such. He sort of just wanted to say that he wanted to enforce his will on the rulers of Kiev. So he sacks Kiev, he positions his own candidate at the throne in Kiev. He sort of tries to do to Kiev the same thing that the Holy Roman Empire wanted to do to Poland. But it wasn't really, he never had, Kiev was just too big and too far away from Poland. He just wanted to accept a degree of dominance over it without direct control.
So looking at his coronation, of the 1025 coronation from our day today, what are we actually celebrating? What do we see in that coronation that informs our identity of being Polish?
That's the interesting bit, because sort of the history proved that 1025 proved to be more important than year 1000. In the medieval period, Polish chroniclers assumed that the year 1000 is more important. They didn't even mention it. In time, we realized that the achievement of 1025 overlasted Bolesław. Bolesław died because in the year 1000, Bolesław claimed the title of the king for himself. You can, a bit simplistically, but truthfully say that in 1025, he claimed the title of a kingdom for his state. And that's sort of more eternal. And in Polish history, for the first 300 years of Polish history, we only have kings for about 10 years. Bolesław dies soon after his coronation. His son, Mieszko II, he's forced to flee the country a couple of years after coronation. Then, for several decades, Poland has no king, just princes. There is another king, Bolesław the Bold, and he is forced into exile a few years after his coronation. Then, for more than a century, you have no kings, and in the 13th century, you have a king, Przemysław II. He's crowned and murdered soon after. So honestly, for the first 300 years, Poland has a king for 10 years. However, for all this time, Poland is referred to as a kingdom, even by the papacy, by the Republic of Venice, by the Rus chronicles of Kiev and Novgorod. So that's the importance of 1025, because that's when Poland sort of eternally becomes a kingdom, whether we have a king or not. That's the secondary.
And what was his reputation as far as future, the Jagiellonians, the elective monarchs are concerned? How did they look upon the Piast start, the start of the Polish state?
The time of Bolesław rule is often portrayed as the golden age, the medieval chronicle, golden age of the history of Poland. The medieval chroniclers loved him. Galanonim, the first Polish chronicler, although he wasn't Polish himself, but he lived in Poland and he wrote the Chronicle of Polish lands. He claims that at the time of Bolesław's rule, Poland was so rich that everyone could wear gold and silver, that silver was as popular as water. So he was a very imposing figure, very popular figure. However, people also agreed that he's very, very cruel, that he's very aggressive. He was a sort of a dominant figure. Later on,
he's not being an exception to the other monarchs of his time, though.
No, of course not. But he led a very expansionist policy. He conquered Pomerania for a time. He conquered Czechia. He sacked Kiev, as we know, and which was a very big achievement, he waged war against the Holy Roman Empire, which sort of ended up in a draw, which was a great success for Poland. Because if you fight with such a strong enemy, ancient enemy, sort of, that's a very big success. So he was a very popular figure, and also because of his conquest of Kiev, what was quite popular, sort of a patron saint of expansion towards the east, but very unfairly so, because as I said, his goal was never to conquer Kiev. But for expansionists, he became a sort of patron. Again, unfairly, because also his son, his family, there were many marriages. His goal was not to conquer Kiev. It was a partnership, but just a partnership in which Poland would dominate.
Final question before we get on to our next clip. How important was Christianity in his motivation? Expansion?
Certainly it was very important for the state building process. And he was actively, despite being cruel himself. He was very active in promoting Christianity among his subjects. My background is in archaeology, so at the time of his rule, we can see sort of private bronze crosses buried with the inhabitants of the kingdom.
Yes,
and they are very...
St. Maurice's spear and all that stuff.
And it's very intimate, so it's not for show, because when king builds a church, it's a political gesture. We don't know whether he's truly Christian. However, if a sort of no-name person is buried with a sort of intimate, very ugly, but still personal cross, we can see that, okay, he probably identifies. So this starts under his rule. However, for his whether it was important as a tool for expansion, yes, but not necessarily. He also supported Christian priests who would vote. He also supported priests who would seek to convert without conquest, like Saint Adalbert, the patron saint of Poland. He was an enemy. He opposed conquest. He tried to convert through simply spreading the word of God.
Yeah. We'll go up from 1795 to the modern times now in our next clip, and then we'll talk more about the perspective from those times.
Sure, thank you.
Following the dismantling of Polish statehood by Russia, Prussia and Austria in 1795, many battle-hardened Poles enlisted in Napoleon Bonaparte's army, fighting in Italy. It is then in 1797 that Józef Wybicki wrote the lyrics for Poland's anthem, "Poland is not yet lost." But following Napoleon's demise in 1815, Poland's old partitioners cut up the Duchy of Warsaw he had established for Poles in 1807, relapsing Poland into non-existence. Still, the idea of an independent Poland lived on through the November and January uprisings of 1830 and 1863 respectively, but also through literature and the concept of organic work strengthening Polish society at the local level, as well as intellectual exertion to promote sympathizers abroad. In 1916, 2 years into World War I, Germany and Austria-Hungary carved out a puppet state from Russian-held Polish lands and proclaimed the creation of a Kingdom of Poland. But Poles fed up with monarchs would not be wooed by the prospect of being ruled by Archduke Charles Stephen of Austria, one of the very few candidates. Poland's Regency Council handed over all military and administrative power to Marshal Józef Piłsudski for his strategic and political acumen on November 11th, 1918, a day later to be celebrated as Poland's Independence Day. Although not without shortcomings, and as of 1926, increasingly dictatorial, Polish statehood would prevail until September 1939. Throughout World War II and the Cold War, Poland's legitimate government in exile would be based in London. Meanwhile, post-World War II territorial Poland would be ruled by puppet apparatchiks loyal to the Soviet Union. From the rigged elections of 1947 to 1989, the People's Republic of Poland transformed Polish statehood into a restrictive, one-party, strictly policed regime where freedom of movement, assembly and speech were strongly limited, if not non-existent. But the workers' protests of 1970 and 1976, caused by food price hikes and birth of the Eastern Bloc's first independent trade union, Solidarność, led to the eventual partial free elections of 1989, despite crackdowns and the imposition of martial law. Following the downfall of the communist regime, Poland's accession to NATO in 1999 and the EU in 2004, the country has continued its streak of democratic governance. This year's festive celebrations of the millennial anniversary of Bolesław the Brave's crowning that took place across Poland on April 12th closed the narrative frame of the king's grand political ambitions and the triumph of Polish statehood.
How does contemporary Polish historiography view these three great blocks of dynasties? The Piasts, Bolesław Chrobry, then the Jagiellonians, then the elective monarchs, and then the slide into the decay of the 18th and 19th century. How do those periods now fit into the Polish view of itself, this 1,000 years?
The traditional perspective that formulated sort of in the early 20th century and is still very strong, but modern academia rather rejects it. The traditional division is that the Piast period, the Piast dynasty is more similar to what we have in Poland now. firmly oriented towards the West, with strong interrelationship with the Holy Roman Empire, with the papacy, some interactions with the East, but predominantly Western-oriented Western state. We list the Jagiellonians themselves with Lithuanian origins, Orthodox origins. The greatest ruler of the Jagiellonian dynasty, Władysław Jagiełło, he had particular affinity for Orthodox culture. We have some Orthodox foundations, religious foundations left from his time. So Jagiellonians are more sort of oriented towards the East. That's the traditional division. However, in modern...
Excuse me, how did that arise? Did that arise from the historians of the 19th century looking towards the West again as a civilizing factor?
Certainly, and also simply in terms of the Poland as a state shifted towards the east in the Jagiellonian period, because particularly the region of Silesia, which today is a part of Poland, it was part of Poland during Piast dynasty, but during Jagiellonian dynasty it was lost. And it's a very wealthy, very Western, it's sort of the westernmost sphere of province of Poland. With the Jagiellonians, we get control of Poland, gets control of large parts of Rus and Belarus, also parts of the Baltic states, of Latvia. So just physically, Poland moves towards the east. And it shows in the culture, because again, this sort of a oligarchy or a sort of a democratic / oligarchic system of the post-medieval period, that's associated with the east, because to control such large swaths of territory, you have to have oligarchs, your representatives in the east. So the perspective is rooted in sort of facts and in territorial borders. However, it's false to think that Piasts were not oriented towards the east. Piasts were also oriented to the east. And if you can, I know I get talkative, but the great symbol of it is the first Polish writer, Gertruda. She's not very well known, but she's a sort of a personal hero of mine. She's a Polish princess from the 11th century. She goes to Kiev. She becomes a queen there, and she writes her own poems, writes her own prayers. And we have her prayer book, which she received from her mother, and her mother was from the imperial Western dynasty. So the prayer book is made in Germany, in Holy Roman Empire, but additional pages are added to it in Kiev, and they are with Byzantine Rus decorations, and she herself writes prayers, personal, intimate. There are political statements in these prayers. So she's not a very well-known figure, but she portrays that Piasts as well, even though they are perceived as oriented towards the West, the East was also part of their intellectual and political horizons.
How did this view change? Was it a view that was in the 60s and 70s by the communists? How did they... You mentioned the fact that it originated in the early 20th century.
Yes.
How did that
in somewhat simplistic, but I still believe true form, it was the two perspectives of how to reclaim Polish nationality, sort of nationalists and the socialist perspective, the great division between, again, somewhat simplistically, Dmowski and Piłsudski. Piłsudski himself, with his roots in Lithuania, he wanted to expand east, but in order to expand east, there are not that many Poles there. There are Belarusians, Ukrainians, Jewish communities. So he didn't want, he was Polish, but his vision of a state was much more multicultural, and therefore this was framed a Jagiellonian vision because it expanded to the east. We list the nationalists, Dmowski. They envisioned, in a way, it can be portrayed positively. They didn't want to enforce their rule on Ukrainians and Belarusians. They say, we're Poles, we only want to rule among Poles. It's a Polish state. And then they referred more to the Piast dynasty. But again, it's just using history. It's not a very accurate picture. Piasts were also oriented towards the east. But the division principally was between sort of right-wing and left-wing political parties in the early 20th century. Jagiellonians, which looked to the east as an area of expansion and multiculturalism, and those looking to the west, more nationalist, a bit anti-Semitic, but ironically, less into expansion into the east.
Yeah. What can we, if we take the rule of Bolesław the First, what are the myths and legends that have arisen over time about his style and about his competency as a ruler? He has a reputation of this great ruler, as you say, east and west, consolidates the state, expands it. It's an accurate picture of how he did it. There's no great myths around him.
I think the sack of Kiev is the one event which is sort of overblown and the whole myth about it is made of false facts, because in Polish sort of Matejko's drawing and in Polish imagination, the Polish king enters Kiev, takes out his sword and smashes it against the gate, the golden gate of Kiev.
Yes, and it has a few chips out of the blade.
Yeah, and it's a topos. This sort of behavior chroniclers also describe in the context of Constantinople, in other sort of smashing your sword against the gate, but the gate was not there. We know that the Golden Gate of Kiev was built after Bolesław's reign, so the gate was not there. The sword, Szczerbiec, the coronation sword of the Polish king, that's 13th century sword. So we know the sword was not there also. So I think it tells you a little bit. So it's true that Bolesław expanded to the east and sacked Kiev, but again, he also ensured dynastic marriages between Rurikowicz, the Rus dynasty, and his own. The House of Kiev and the House of Gniezno, they were closely interrelated, and soon after that sack, there were additional alliances made. So I think one of the myths is the sort of colonial conquest heritage of Bolesław, which isn't as simple as that. His policies towards the east were more complex.
A final question to you, Dr. Borowski. You and I have both been educated in England, and we know 1066, the Battle of Hastings, 1,000 years ago, and it's still relevant to much English thinking about itself. When we celebrate the coronation, is it a justified thing to be proud of?
Oh, I certainly think so. Not just because I made an exhibition about it, but in a
very good one, by the way.
Thank you very much. The way I like to speak about it is that there are two things. One, coronation raises the status of a state towards a kingdom, so more or less equal to even France. For example, Portugal is not a kingdom yet at that time. Some of the Scandinavian states they are states, but they're not kingdoms as such. So it raises the status. Even Czechia was baptized, accepted Christianity before Poland, but it got its crown later. So we're sort of running up even before, ahead of Czechia. So that's a traditional statement. We can be proud because we become kingdom similar to other important kingdoms of Europe. However, what I like to sort of emphasize also that these are the foundations of community, of the Polish community. During that time, the word Poland appears for the first time. We have it on coins of Bolesław.
Yes.
And also we know that the king himself named his country Poland, or used that name. It's important because in many other cases, we only know that other chroniclers use that name. The famous example, Celts. We don't know whether Celts fought themselves Celts. We know that Romans fought themselves. Here we know that Bolesław names his kingdom or uses the name Poland for his kingdom. And Poland, modern academia shows the meaning of that word, that means civilized. Pole is field. People of the fields are in Christianity juxtaposed to people of the forest. People of the forest are wild, barbarians, nothing good comes out of their lives. People of the field labor, and there is a good produce of their labor. So it's not just the rising of Poland as a status of a kingdom, it's the birth of a sort of Polish community as a civilized land. And even though we might not have kings later, because there are very few kings, as I said, but we are a kingdom with the community, because there is not much time to talk about it, but he also makes a lot of effort into transforming Polish economy, cutting forests, building mines of lead. So we can be proud of it because it's the beginning of a modern state with a community of inhabitants, not just a personal achievement of one king.
Dr. Borowski, fascinating discussion. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
That's all we have time for today. Join us next time. That's Tuesday, 9:35, 21:35 CET. And check us out on YouTube as well. So join us then.